TFM.
Welcome, Boomers, to another episode of Warp 5, our dedicated Star Trek Enterprise podcast. I'm Christopher Jones, and with me, as he always is my esteemed co-host, Matthew Rushing. And Matthew, just wondering if I could maybe borrow a cup of deuterium from you.
Chris, I'm actually fresh out, shockingly enough, and having a little trouble, getting my quota finished here. So, I don't know, maybe you could come back, try later this season. That's probably going to be your best bet. So sorry about that.
Well, I was very misled by that Kritassin. I mean, he told me you were the guy. He actually called you Mr. Deuterium.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's shocking. And I do love that moniker. That's really, what I'm going for in life.
Mr. D.
Is to be known. Mr. D. Yes. So forgive me. I'm sorry. I was not able to help you out. But yeah, again, I could probably be ready, say, I don't know, maybe closer to the fall.
Okay.
So
I see. When football season starts. All right. I got you.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. When you're watching your old Alabama football there, come on by. I'll probably have more of what you're looking for.
All right. I'll do that. Yes, everyone. Today we are going to continue our look at the 20th anniversary of Star Trek Enterprise with episode 6 of season 2, Marauders. The Klingons are back in town, and here's a quick rundown of the story. Archer continues setting the stage for centuries of conflict between the Federation and the Klingon Empire when he stands up for the inhabitants of a mining colony. But to be fair, how hard is it to come into conflict with Klingons? Deuterium aside, the captain doesn't like bullies, not on Earth and not here, on whatever planet this is. The crew of the Enterprise puts Klingon Commander Korok, not nearly as cute as his Zelda namesake, in his place when they teach the colonists how to defend themselves. Yeah, Matthew, I love the fact that it's a little bit of retconning, considering that Zelda, at least the frequent use of Koroks in Breath of the Wild comes long after this episode was made, but the fact that the Klingon commander has the same name as those cute little forest creatures kind of makes me laugh.
Yes, that is very funny. So,
well, let's just get started with this episode and the fact that it's a timeless theme, because I'll show my hand right up front. This has never been one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek Enterprise. Not so much because there's something I dislike about it, but just because it doesn't really grab me, doesn't engage me too much. And that might be because it's a story that's been told over and over and over. And in fact, they based this episode on Akira Kurosawa's The Seven Samurai, which is also known as the Magnificent Seven in the U.S. And that story is one of Kurosawa's most famous films. It was made in 1954, and it tells a story that was set in 1586. And now Marauders here, this story takes place in 2152. So you can see there that, what is that, almost 600 years later, the same situation is happening somewhere else out in space. And I assume, Matthew, you're probably familiar with the Seven Samurai, especially because George Lucas drew from Kurosawa for a lot of Star Wars. But this story in particular, Marauders, really closely mirrors the basic plot of the Seven Samurai.
Yes. I mean, I've seen the Seven Samurai, and I've seen a few of Kurosawa's works, obviously, like you mentioned, specifically because of the influence of George Lucas, had an impact on the things that, I wanted to research. And absolutely, I mean, it's a story that we've seen before. And of course, like you said, Magnificent Seven then, took that with the Western That movie's been remade now as well. And, of course, everybody's favorite Steve Martin film, The Three Amigos, which is basically this story, too. So this is definitely a story that we've seen quite a few times in cinema history. And it's kind of one, I think, it feels very familiar. I mean, we even saw it in Star Trek Insurrection. It's a very similar type of story to this. So, yeah, I mean, not that makes this a bad story, but it's definitely one that feels very familiar.
Yeah, it's very familiar. I mentioned that it follows the plot of Seven Samurai rather closely, arriving at the village, reluctance of the villagers to talk to them at first. Then they find out that there's this problem going on. They train the villagers to defend themselves. Then when the bandits or marauders in this case arrive, they're shocked that the villagers have these new tactics to defend against them. So it very much follows that element, even having the lone boy in the story, although the story itself's a bit different, but putting those elements in shows how they drew from that story. So being a very basic story like this, however, does it engage you? Does the way the story pulls in Archer and the rest of the crew and puts them in another situation where they're out in space where they have to make, I guess, essentially a moral decision? Do they leave these people or do they help them? Does that connect with you? Does it work as a way of advancing the Enterprise story?
I think what's interesting about this story is that it does for me with the Enterprise crew, and specifically it's because it connects with the type of stories that we have been telling for the Enterprise crew and the conundrums that they've had with whether or not to get involved. And so I think to tell the story here makes sense. And I think, too, because one of the things that it also helps us do is be able to see the ways in which the characters have grown, right? And the questions that they're asking. In fact, Archer even assumes that T'Pol will not be on his side here because they've had this type of discussion before. Yeah. But then, of course, he frames the discussion with different points that he feels like makes this different in this situation than in other situations that they have faced. And so I think, to me, that's what actually makes this really interesting, is that, yes, we have, seen this before, and this discussion with the crew of the Enterprise, but I feel like they're utilizing this episode as a way to show, Archie even mentioned, we've been in space for over a year now. And so this comes down to everything that they've been through. And I think we then get an opportunity to discuss something a little bit different.
Yeah. Well, the use of the Klingons, let's talk about that. I think that part, even though I'm not a huge fan of Klingons or Klingon episodes, probably well known to longtime listeners of the network, I think the use of Klingons here works well in connection to Archer and building the Star Trek mythology, the relationship between the Federation and the Klingons and how it went bad. And it's interesting that, tell me how you feel about this. I often feel that in a sense, and it makes sense for how the real world works, a single person can influence the course of history between two groups of people. And Archer, in his interactions with the Klingons, this is the fourth time that we see them, it's building this animosity between the two sides. And initially, I feel like Archer approached the Klingons trying to help. And even in Sleeping Dogs, he's trying to help, but clearly the Klingons don't want any help. Mm-hmm. And now he faces off with a group of, these are probably just everyday Klingons. They're not warriors on some big flagship or anything like that, but they certainly have the Klingon personality, and they're tougher than the colonists, and they're going to take what they want, and they probably do this to many people on many worlds. small colonies or miners or such. Reminded me a little bit of Errand of Mercy, going back to a TOS connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In that case, it was...
Yeah, I think that's a great pull, actually.
Yeah. I mean, in that case, it might be seen more as the Klingons trying to expand their empire, expand their reach geographically in space. But it's also a case where, from the Klingon perception, they're dealing with a group of people who basically can't defend themselves, and they'll just do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway,
Well,
I was meandering there, but what do you think about this idea of Archer's interactions with the Klingons and building animosity?
So I was actually kind of shocked that you put that on the outline, because I didn't read that as this part of the episode at all, because of the fact that Archer and his crew dress like the people there.
Yeah.
They hide themselves from the Klingons.
Yeah.
And so I don't think the Klingons ever realized that the crew is involved in this at all, which is I think that's where I actually feel like the episode does a great job of showing just how much Archer has learned over the last year. Or, I mean, the idea of making sure that you keep yourself from raising the animosity level with you and the Klingons.
That's a good point.
By hiding yourself from them here is a really, really smart idea. And to me, I think that shows just real growth in the character here. And I really am glad that we went that route, because I do think it would have been slightly silly for them to get involved here and basically let the Klingons know. And now, in that, we do know from T'Pol that most likely these are probably raiders and marauders that don't have anything to do with they're just Klingons out there trying to make a buck and take advantage of people that they can take advantage of because they can't help themselves, right? They don't, or at least they don't think they can help themselves. And so I think that's great, too. I think what it does is it adds dimension, too, as we've talked about, with what Deep Space Nine does for the Klingons, and it gives them dimension here. We can see that, this actually might not be something that the Klingon Empire would necessarily, or the Council would necessarily sanction,
Mm-hmm.
So I think all of that's just fantastic stuff. And so I'm interested then, because you did seem to take it that way. What kind of made you see it that way?
I think I'm just thinking of it in broad terms. What you explain, of course, makes perfect sense. And they do take that step to not expose the fact that they are from Earth and it's Starfleet and it's Archer and so forth. I think when I look at it, the reason I put that on the outline and the reason I'm thinking that way is probably less the details of this story, but just as a viewer, we're being given these periodic encounters between Archer and Klingons, and it builds and it builds, and the Klingons are predisposed to not liking everyone they meet, which is why I said in the intro there that how hard is it to get on the bad side of Klingons. But there was potential for better relations between the Klingons and the humans, I think, in the beginning. But maybe the inexperience of Archer and his crew in the early months of their voyage, the first year when they did encounter Klingons, they didn't quite know how to handle them, and it just sent the relationship on this trajectory of conflict, which eventually leads to war. And I'm just thinking of it in those terms, and I don't know if that's any intention on the part of Berman and Braga writing this stuff to build that influence into the relationship, I think using the Klingons here makes a lot of sense merely for the story. If you're going to base something on Seven Samurai and, what aliens do we most associate with that type of culture? In modern Star Trek, it would be the Klingons, and also Raiders, Marauders, Klingons. It makes sense. Warriors make sense. So, yeah, I think I'm just thinking of it in broader terms, and maybe I got myself off track in terms of what really happens in the story, because you're right. There is no one-on-one conflict between Archer and the Klingons here.
Well, and, I do think, though, it is an interesting question, and I think that by asking it, it allows us to see actually the ways in which I think Archer is making good decisions here by utilizing, orbits and, costuming and all of that kind of thing to not allow the Klingons to know that he's here, so that this doesn't escalate tensions between Starfleet and the Klingons. I guess, again, too, I think the thing that it really does is it does show that there has been character growth for this character in the amount of time that he has been in space. It's not... This character is asking more questions than he would have ever asked at the beginning of the show. And I think that's a really nice thing to be able to see. So if you're going to tell the story, you need it to do something for your characters. And I do think this does enough for, especially the character of Archer. But I mean, that's not the only character we see here. I mean, heck, this episode shows us that, when we first saw in season 1 with Hoshi practicing with the training remotes, she has become somebody who's very proficient now in weapons. And so that's one of those places where we just took a 30 seconds, maybe a minute, to utilize something to show us where we've come with one character, which that's great. That's what you actually want from a second season, right?
Okay, well, speaking of that moment with Hoshi, another thing that we can talk about a little bit is how they do get everyone involved in this story. We're inching our way towards that time in Enterprise where the characters who aren't part of the triumvirate start to fade away a little bit more, but the element of the basic story of Seven Samurai of training the villagers to protect themselves does give them the opportunity here to get Hoshi involved, to get Travis involved, keep everybody involved. And what you point out is great. Yeah, it is that very soft continuity that we talk about sometimes, of just going back and revisiting moments and reminding us of things that happen. And with Hoshi, yeah.
Well, and I mean, that's the other thing to hear that we get. And it's a shift a little bit in the sense that this whole season and the end of last season, we saw T'Pol becoming closer and closer with her human crewmates in the sense of the way that she interacts with them. And not only that, but just changes for her. And I don't know if this is necessarily a change for her, but it's something that Archer doesn't expect. He expects her to disagree with him. And yet she does agree with him that this bullying is wrong, that these people being taken advantage of is wrong. The question for her, and of course for Archer, is okay, if we want to do something about it, how do we make sure that it is a more permanent solution than one that's where we help them and then, the next time they come back, they wipe these people out or something, So I think I really appreciated that because it really gave us another, milestone of T'Pol's journey with her human crewmates. So,
yeah. The fact that she tells Archer that I agree with you, right? that really caught Archer off guard.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned
like,
that.
Wait. Can I have you say that again so I can record that and play
Exactly.
it back to you later on?
Yeah, I could just see him recording it, and then when he says things, he just presses play on a little recorder, and he has T'Pol going,
Yeah.
I agree with you.
I agree with you.
But anyway, you mentioned earlier that this happened, and it's a continuation of what we've discussed on the past few episodes of the podcast here about how she has grown and grown and grown. And I'm thinking if that starts to transcend logic for her, where she's starting to think a little bit more like a human, where she's at least looking at situations and making decisions that aren't purely based on logic at this point, because I don't know, do you agree that the logical thing to do would be to not get involved in this and go find some deuterium somewhere else?
Well, I mean, Archer mentioned that they only have about 2 weeks left of the deuterium. And so...
But of course, they get what they need. T'Pol, they get what they need, and then T'Pol tells Archer that it's on board. And then it's Archer who's thinking, well, we need to do something about these people. And then, she says she agrees. Right. So it's after they do at least secure enough deuterium that then T'Pol decides to go along with this plot.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. That's an excellent point that we do actually see T'Pol make a decision that is a little bit shocking, I think, in the sense that, at least from where we've been with her, that she would say, no, I think we should maybe do something about this, because you're right, they did get what they need. What I do love about that, though, is that there's a sense of T'Pol, I think, being willing to, along with the way Archer thinks, to say that things are right and wrong and should be changed. And that if we have the ability to change, we should do something about it. And I think, that is quite a human thing, I think, to do. Especially with what we know of as humans in the series. And so, yeah, I mean, it is, I think, like everybody else, we were, as viewers, a little bit just as shocked that T'Pol would make this decision. But it makes for, I think, this whole thing is about growing character. And I really appreciate that we're not taking the easy road in any of these decisions that we're making with these characters, especially the Vulcans. And it makes it much more interesting, I think, to do things that are slightly shocking to us as viewers, because otherwise, why do the show? Like, I just feel like it would be boring if there weren't any surprises. And so this is one of those places where I really feel like Enterprise is giving us an opportunity to do something different, which is the whole point of this show, which was not to just be your grandpa's Star Trek. It was to try and give us something new, and by giving us a different type of Vulcans, and by actually giving us Vulcan growth. I mean, how many years did it take Spock to get to the point where he says that, famous line in Star Trek 6 about how logic is only the beginning of wisdom?
Yeah.
Like, that's the entire run of him as Spock, basically.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I
mean, it takes that long for us to get to that point. And so, yeah, I really think, this is, okay, much nicer that we're not gonna make you wait.
Yeah. I'm picturing them doing something else different. I wish that there had been a scene, and also getting everyone involved. I wish there had been a scene where the Klingons are pulling out a phaser and they're about to shoot somebody, and then Porthos runs up and bites their pants leg and pulls on and tugs, and then they They lose their focus.
Yeah, it could have happened.
I mean,
Could have happened.
It would have made up for peeing on the tree, I think. Right? Help us out, Porthos. Do something.
Yeah, seriously,
helpful for a
Porthos,
change.
come on.
Yeah.
Exactly. I wouldn't have mind him peeing on a Klingon.
See,
that would have been kind of funny.
See, now that would have been perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
but then they would have known humans were there, right?
That's
maybe,
true,
possibly.
yeah.
I mean, who knows how much they know about human domestic animals? So
Well, maybe their animosity would have been directed towards canines on Earth, not humans themselves from that point forward.
this is true. And then everybody would have been even madder at Berman and Braga, so.
Exactly. Talking about being able to do something different with this story, though, using this very basic story but putting the Star Trek wrappings around it, they were able to use T'Pol, as we're talking about, to do something with a character that's unexpected, even though the plot of the story is very straightforward and very familiar to the viewer. So that's going back to the very beginning when I asked if the basic story works for you with Star Trek. I think that's a good point of how you can use something timeless and put a twist on it that works for your universe. And last thing here, I put it on the outline. I don't think there's really much to discuss, but it just caught my attention. And talking about Porthos reminds me of pets and animals in Star Trek. And I called this Spot Syndrome because we all remember in the episode Genesis on The Next Generation where Spot, Data's cat, miraculously switched genders and became female and had kittens, which helped save the day. And here, Phlox's osmotic eel is suddenly female. Had been male before, now it's female. And so I don't know if that was a mistake, given that Berman and Braga are writing the episode, wrote the story anyway, and they would certainly know, or if it's like a sneaky homage to Genesis, which is how I like to think of it.
That is, I did not even catch that. And I saw that on the outline. I was like, I would never have even thought of, I guess just shows you how little I know about Phlox's menagerie. So,
well, I thought it was quite generous of him to be willing to give away his eel. So,
yeah, I mean, well, and it seemed like maybe he had another one or something,
I think
or
so.
He could get another one easily.
I think
so,
it's a backup eel. Yeah, probably.
That everybody needs a backup eel.
Exactly. All right. I think we've run through everything anyway that I have to say about this episode. What are your final thoughts and what's your rating?
I don't think that this is a bad episode or anything, but I do think, in the run of episodes, it's probably slightly more mediocre. And it, again, it's watchable. I had no problems rewatching the episode, but I will say this, I kind of forgot it existed. So that's probably not great. And so I would say this is probably 3 out of 5 gender swapping eels.
Wow. All right. We should publish a book one of these days it's like an encyclopedia of everything that we've ever used as a rating metric on the network, not just on this show, but
oh man, I don't know if we have time for that.
That'd be quite a task if someone wanted to compile that, especially going back to the Ready Room all those years. Yeah.
It's true.
All right. Yeah, same for me. Like, I don't forget the episode exists, but I remember that, there's this Klingon episode early in season 2. And that's kind of what I think about it. And I don't know. The discussion, I think, was good today for me anyway, just because, as usually happens when I discuss Star Trek with you, I find something new to consider as a positive from the writing and how it builds on Star Trek for us as viewers and digs into characters and issues. So that was good. But I don't know. I think I'm just going to give this episode 4 cranial ridges.
Nice.
All right, everyone. We would love to hear your thoughts on Marauders. If you'd like to share those with us, there are many ways for you to do that. Perhaps the best way is to go to Facebook and join the Babel Conference. That is our listeners group. Just type Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the search field and it should come up. If not, type the whole name, the Babel Conference. It is a closed group, so if you're joining for the first time, please answer the questions and agree to the rules of the forum so that I can let you in. You'll find a post there on the timeline for this episode, and you can just put your comments there, share those with fellow listeners and Matthew and me, and we'd love to hear from you there. And if you would like to send us email, you can do that as well. Just go to our website, trek.fm/contact, choose to send to a show, and choose Warp 5, and that will come to Matthew and me by email. And in social media, on Instagram, Twitter, and everywhere, you can find us under the username TrekFM. Now, Matthew, when you're not learning to become more evasive with those one-on-one Vulcan martial arts lessons with T'Pol, where can people find you?
Oh, goodness. Well, you can find me all over social media under the name MattRushing02. You can also find me here on the network on our side of the network that doesn't have anything to do with Star Trek called the 602 Club, and we talk about all of those fandoms that we love so much that are outside of the Star Trek fandom. You can also find me doing literary treks about the books and the comics of Star Trek, The Orb about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Saddle Up about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and The Artificial Tango about Star Trek Picard. And then over on the Nerd Party Network, I did 2 shows, and I do 2 shows. One's completed, though. It's called Owl Post. I did that with Dre Kaufman. We talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, 1 chapter at a time. And then you can also find me over there doing Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills, which is a Star Wars podcast. But Chris, when you're not trying to figure out what happened to your other eel, where can people find you?
Yeah, I like to keep 2 wheels around, and I feel a little uncomfortable when there's only one. So
it's understandable.
I really need to find them. When I'm not doing that, you can find me elsewhere on the network doing the shows that you mentioned that we do together. Also, Larry Nemeczek and I do the Ready Room from time to time, and there's Interface, and you can hear me in many episodes of many shows in the back catalog, including the early episodes of this show when I first launched it, took it out of space dock at Warp 5. So check those out if you want to hear more of my thoughts on Star Trek. And if you would like to chat in social media, you can find me everywhere under the username C. Bryan Jones, letter C and Bryan with a Y. That's my name everywhere, but Twitter is where I'm most active, and I'd love to chat with you there. If you'd like to help us keep all of these shows going, we could definitely use your help through Patreon. To find out how to get involved in the network, become an associate producer and such, please visit patreon.com/trekfm. That's patreon.com/trekfm. We would not be here without the support of all of you listening, and thank you so much to everyone who is supporting us right now. And if you're not doing so yet, I do hope that you will consider doing so. Thank you so much, everyone. Well, Matthew, I am going to prepare for a little chase next time as we get ready to discuss the 7th.
Well, Chris, that sounds like a pretty good idea. So let's go.